Thanks for joining me for the Season 3 premiere episode of the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. This is the 65th episode of the show and the 44th regular episode. I am psyched to kick off this new season with Holly Clark today. Holly is the author of the new book, The Chromebook Infused Classroom, and we'll be talking about rethinking assessment in the digital age. We'll be talking about Flipgrid, Book Creator, Screencastify, Seesaw, Wakelet, and OneNote. Plus, I'll be sharing a little about how the word "and" can help us with remote learning and other out-of-the-ordinary school situations this fall. Let's get to it.
I'm Matthew Woods, host of Leading Out of the Woods, a part of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to now. Shows on the network are individually owned, and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
Welcome to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast with Jake Miller.
Welcome in, duct tapers, and welcome into any new friends as well. I'm so grateful and honored that you've chosen to let my voice into your ear canals today. And might I say also that it's impressively clean in these ear canals? You've clearly been using Q-tips. Go you! I'm so excited to bring my chat with Holly Clark to you today. Holly is absolutely amazing, and she shares some fantastic tips and some quotes that I hurriedly jotted down while I was chatting with her. I can't believe that I'm already recording this episode, by the way. I feel like I just tied a bow on Season 2, and it's already time to kick off Season 3. But I didn't want to wait any longer. I know that many of you are either already back to school or going back the next few days. I wanted to make sure that I had this little piece of professional development, and giggles, of course, here and ready for you as soon as possible. Actually, as soon as possible might not be the right phrase here, because I'm releasing this episode 2 days later than I had originally planned. I edited my interview with Holly on Tuesday, which was perfect timing, and planned to record this portion of the episode Tuesday evening, which would have worked out great. But then there was a family walk, and then there was a family trip for ice cream, and then there was a tired daddy, that's me. And I decided, you know what, I should just relax and rest. And so I did. I delayed the episode to Thursday, which worked out so perfectly, or so I thought, because my wife and in-laws were taking the kids to the Asian Lantern Festival at the Cleveland Zoo, which seemed like the perfect opportunity for me to stay home and record and edit this episode. But then my son's baseball coach called me at 5:30 p.m. to tell me that the game that we thought was on Thursday at 8:30 p.m. was actually on Wednesday, that day, at 8:30 p.m. So there went the family trip to the zoo, and there went my podcast editing time, and there went the rest of our evening because the game went until after 11. What a night. So here I am, Thursday afternoon, recording this episode so that I can get it to you on Friday. Now, don't pity me, because this is one of my favorite things to do. I am such an educational technology geek and have such a passion for supporting educators that I was sad to not edit and record this sooner. So don't feel bad for me for having to do it. Feel bad for me that I didn't get to do it as soon as I wanted to, I guess. But anyhow, I love doing this, and I'm so excited to share with you guys today. So that's a little bit of the backstory of how this Wednesday morning episode became a Friday morning episode. It also probably preps you for the school year well, because you get to hear me give you excuses, and now you're tuned in for when your students are giving them to you here in a few days or weeks. Anyhow, speaking of today's episode, I am so excited to share some great content and some fun with you today. But first, a word from today's sponsor. Support for this episode comes from our friends at Pear Deck, who believe that as teachers, we know that when kids are truly engaged and excited about learning, it's the best feeling in the world. And in this new remote setting, that could feel harder to achieve than ever before. Pear Deck is here to help. With Pear Deck, you can easily transform your presentations into engaging, active lessons using Pear Deck formative assessments and questions, and send them straight to student devices so they can participate in real time. Ready to get started? Pear Deck is offering educators free premium access and free webinars every day so that you can get going right away. Plus, they've teamed up with myself and other educators to offer special edition webinars to share insight from a variety of educator perspectives. Save your seat at their next webinar today. Head to peardeck.com/learn-pair-deck to register. And that link, as always, is in the show notes. For those of you who are educational duct tape newbies, I'd like to share a little bit with you about how an episode goes. So I always start the show with an introduction, kind of like this one, followed by one of my soapbox moments, which are my chance to do something like a mini TED Talk, minus the stage, audience, and fanfare, that is. After that, I'll welcome in my guest to do the educational duct tape thing. First, after a brief chat, the guest and I play a game so that we can get to know them and laugh together. Then I'll ask the guest an educational duct tape question. This is a question that a teacher might have in their own practice. My guest and I will take turns discussing educational technology tools or strategies that we can use to answer that question. And boy, by the way, do Holly and I have a good one for you today. Anyhow, after that discussion, after we tie a bow on that question and I bid my guest adieu, comes the celebration of the adjacent possible. That's the time when we hear from the duct tapers. That's you. In this segment, I share some of my favorite tweets about the show, so get out there and share a clever one about today's episode. A recording from the educational duct tape Flipgrid, so click the link in the show notes and submit a recording. And finally, an Apple Podcasts review for the show. So head over there and give the show a witty review. And then I'll bid you a farewell for a fortnight, that's 2 weeks, until the next episode. But that's when the real fun starts, because a week later, on the following Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, we'll have an educational duct tape Twitter chat. That's hashtag #EduDuctTape Twitter chat, where we'll enjoy each other's company while chatting about the topics from that episode. So mark your calendars for August 12th, that's next Wednesday, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern, and if you're available, join us for the hashtag #EduDuctTape Twitter chat. And then a week after that, the process will start over again with a new guest, new episode, and then a week later, a new chat, and so on throughout the school year. Okay, so that gets the newbies up to speed and tells you what an episode looks like. So let's dig into the content of this episode. But the last thing to do before I hop up on my soapbox is to share a little bit about my calendar with you. So my rear view mirror is absolutely packed with virtual presentations and events, but there aren't quite as many on the road ahead. I'm not sure if I'm complaining and asking for more or relieved for a bit of a break from Zoom calls and Google Meets, but I'll be a part of the Fall Q and the TCCA conference in October. I'll also have cohorts of my virtual workshop called Best Practices and Tools for Learning in All Settings workshop running in September, October, and November. Beckett, you're making this really hard for me to record right now. My 6-year-old son is in the room with me right now building Legos, and as I talk, he's lip syncing to my voice. So I have to look at my voice supposedly coming out of the mouth of a 6-year-old talking about workshops and things like that. You're killing me, kid. Oh, goodness. Anyhow, I'll have cohorts of my virtual workshop called Best Practices and Tools for Learnings in All Settings workshop running in September and October and November, 3 separate cohorts of it. This workshop is a partnership with Kent State University's Research Center for Educational Technology. At this point, 42 participants of the summer cohorts have completed the feedback form. In terms of usefulness in their work as an educator, 34 of those 42 gave it a 5, and the remaining 8 people gave it a 4. That averages out to 4.8, which makes me so proud. And then, as if that wasn't enough, 37 of them gave it a 5 on the question, how likely would you be to recommend a future cohort of this workshop to a colleague? That question averaged a 4.85 on the 5-point scale. So I'm super touched and honored and proud of those ratings, as you can tell. More details about this program, which covers my 4 MVPs of blended and remote learning, Flipgrid, Screencasting, Edpuzzle, and Pear Deck or Nearpod, can be found at jakemiller.net/KSU course 2020. That's jakemiller.net/KSU, as in Kent State University, course 2020. And Beckett is still lip syncing to everything I say right now, which is driving me crazy. Okay, that does it. Here we go. Let's get started. Oh, sorry. Hold on. Let me just grab my soapbox from over here. Yeah. There we go. That's perfect. Climb up on there. So today I'd like to talk to you about flexible learning, because what we need in our lives right now as we enter what's going to be surely, unfortunately, an insane school year is flexibility in the way that we do things in our classrooms. Now, we're going to talk about the words but and the words and. Now, I've talked about these 2 words before on the show last season, but I want to reiterate it because I've really done some thinking about the words but and the words and how they apply to remote learning and hybrid learning and just any uncertainty in learning where we know that educational technology is going to support us. So we're going to talk about the words but and how they help us with flexible learning with EdTech as we prepare for back to school time. Now, when I talk about the words but and, I'm talking about them from the lens of a guy named Bernard Roth, who's the author of the book, The Achievement Habit: Stop Wishing, Start Doing, and Take Command of Your Life. And in this book, Roth talks about how when we use the word and in sentences instead of the word but in those sentences, it could be incredibly powerful. He says, when you open up the dialogue with and, again, instead of but, your brain gets to consider how it can deal with both parts of the sentence. When you open up the dialogue with and, your brain gets to consider how it can deal with both parts of the sentence. And when we do that, we find out that we're opening ourselves up for flexibility, and we're also opening ourselves up for problem solving. So here's an example of this in my regular life. I've got a dog named Kermit. Kermit the dog. Kermit is the best. He's a 12-and-a-half-year-old Boston Terrier. We're not sure if he's full-bred, but we just know he's fully amazing. And Kermit loves to play fetch. And anytime I go out to mow the lawn, Kermit sees that as a signal that it's time for him to play fetch. Now, this is probably my fault that he developed this habit, but it creates a little bit of a problem for me because I need to push the lawnmower and Kermit really wants me to throw his ball for him at the same time. So at first, the sentence that came to mind for me was, Kermit likes to play fetch, but I need to mow the lawn. And that word but kind of shuts the sentence down. It makes it sound like I either need to play fetch with the dog or I need to mow the lawn, but I can't do both, right? But shuts it down and doesn't open it up for a solution. But listen, if I change that one word, Kermit likes to play fetch and I need to mow the lawn. Aha, now my brain gets to think about both parts, playing fetch and mowing the lawn. And so what I did was I got a ball thrower, and it's about 3 feet long, maybe 2.5 feet long, and I could hold it in one hand, and I could pick the ball up off the ground without really bending down and barely even breaking my stride while I'm mowing the lawn, and I could toss it off to the side across the yard pretty far while still moving, barely even slowing down my flow of lawn mowing. So that tool helps me because I use the word and. Kermit likes to play fetch, and I need to mow the lawn. And that ball thrower tool helps me make both of those things happen because that word and opened up the dialogue and let me consider both parts of the sentence. Okay. Now, this happens in education all the time, but it really is happening right now as many of us are moving into school years as remote learning instructors or as hybrid learning instructors or as in-person instructors. Where maybe we know that there's a possibility we'll go remote at some point in time, or maybe some of our students are remote, or maybe we're in person, but everybody's 6 feet apart, or who knows what's happening. There's plenty of opportunities for the word but to happen, right? For example, I need to hear from all of my students, but we're in a situation of remote learning, or but we're in hybrid learning, or but I only have 12 kids in the classroom with me at one time, or but my kids can't move freely throughout the classroom. Well, let's just say remote learning, but I know there's lots of different situations for lots of different listeners and lots of different educators. So I need to hear from all of my students, but we're in a remote learning situation. Now, change that to the word and. I need to hear from all of my students and I'm in a remote learning situation. So now that opens my brain up to think about how I can hear from my students in a remote learning situation or in a hybrid situation or whatever your situation might be. But that word and lets me consider both parts of it. And I can come up with a variety of solutions. Maybe I start using Flipgrid in the classroom, right? Maybe I start using Screencastify and Loom and having the kids record videos. Or maybe I start using Screencastify Submit and having my kids submit videos to me to watch. Maybe I start using Nearpod or Pear Deck so that my kids can respond to questions I ask them. Maybe I start using Seesaw so that my kids can respond to prompts and activities and assignments with video or audio or drawings or text, right? Maybe I start using Padlet that lets kids post to Padlets using, again, it's kind of the same thing, audio or video or text or whatever it might be. All of these different things, when I use the word and, I could do hearing from all of my students and being in a remote learning situation because it lets me open it up and consider these tools or a number of other tools that would work here too that could help me do that. Here's another example. My youngest of my 3 kiddos, Beckett is a 6-year-old. Beckett loves to play Legos. Actually, earlier in this episode, you heard Beckett in the background building Legos and lip syncing along to me as I was doing the podcast. He's not in the room with me right now, but Beckett loves to build with Legos. Now, my oldest of my 3 kids, my other son, Cohen, loves to play baseball. And actually, I mentioned that earlier. Cohen had his all-star baseball game last night and messed up my recording time. And so Beckett loves to build with Legos. Cohen loves to play baseball. Now, we end up with a situation where Beckett likes to build Legos, but Cohen has a baseball game. And that's problematic for us because my wife and I both want to go watch the baseball game, right? But Beckett would prefer to be building Legos. Now, the word but makes it sound like, sorry, Beckett, you can't build Legos. Cohen's got a baseball game, right? Now, if we put in the word and, Beckett likes to build Legos and Cohen has a baseball game, it opens up that dialogue to consider both parts. And you know what we did? We got a little Lego suitcase for Beckett, and he could fill it up with Legos and take it to the game with him if he wants. So Beckett sits on the sidelines building Legos in his little Lego bin. Well, Cohen is on the field playing baseball, and mom and dad are on the sidelines watching. By using the word "and," it opened that sentence up for both parts to be considered and for a solution to be found that could address both of those needs, right? For example, in the classroom, I need my instruction to be interactive, but we're in a remote learning setting, but my students and I are accessing the content and accessing the coursework at different times. We're in an asynchronous situation, but we're in a hybrid situation, but my students all have to be 6 feet apart in the classroom, so it's really hard for things to be interactive. There's a lot of different ways we could use the word "but" here. But if we put the word "and" in place, I need my instruction to be interactive, and I'm in a remote learning setting, or again, whatever it might be, then it opens up my situation for me to consider tools, and again, that's educational duct tape, right, that can help me solve these different problems, right? So what tools can let me have interactive instruction in a remote learning setting? And again, using the word "and," I can consider that. So maybe, again, I start using Flipgrid, where I send out a prompt with a video, and my students respond with videos, and they use whiteboard mode, and they use blackboard mode, and they use screen sharing, and they put pictures on screen. They do all kinds of things so that the instruction is interactive. I'm sending a video to them. They're sending a video back to me. It's interactive. Maybe we're using something like Edpuzzle, where it's not super interactive, but there's two parts, right? I'm sending a video to my students. My students are responding with answers. So that's interactive right there, right? Maybe we use Pear Deck or Nearpod or other similar tools like ClassFlow, right? Where I'm sending content to my students or showing content to my students on regular slides, or maybe on web slides, or maybe with a PhET simulation or VR, or who knows. And my students are able to interact by responding back to me with drawings or with draggable slides or with text or whatever it might be, but that's interactive. Maybe I'm using a tool like GoFormative. That's another great formative assessment tool that also allows me to send information to my students, but also get responses back from them to interact. And I mentioned it before, but Seesaw, fantastic at this. It's a great content delivery tool, but it also gives my students great ways to interact with content that I send to them. Now, in all of these situations, I'm exercising an equation that I like to reference. I'm actually wearing my bracelet that says it right now, that says E plus R equals O. Now, E plus R equals O goes all the way back to a guy named Jack Canfield. And Canfield was one of the authors of Chicken Soup for the Teenage Soul and all those books. And he was a speaker too. And he and other people who speak and write and talk about E plus R equals O might tell you that this equation can solve any problem in your life. And I disagree. I think that's ridiculous. Not all problems are created equal. However, I think it is the correct mindset that can give you a chance to solve and address and overcome any problem in your life. You might not be able to truly overcome it, but this equation gives you the best chance to do so. And this equation says E, the event, you have no control over it. So if you're in a remote learning situation right now, you have no control over it. There is a global pandemic right now, and we have no control over it. We have control over what we do to try to help our people, our humanity, our society come out of it, right? And our families survive it, but we can't control that. These are events that we have no control over. However, at least in our classrooms, we have an outcome in mind that we're trying to get to, right? We want our students to be safe. We want our students to be happy. We want our students to feel loved and cared for. We want them to also be able to learn, but we want them to have their social and emotional needs met. There's a whole lot of different outcomes we're going for. And in that setting, we select the R. That's the second part of the equation. E plus R equals O. We select the R, or response, that can help us get us there. So we can't control the events we have. We have outcomes we want to get to. The only thing we have control over is the R, the response we get. So thinking back about the situations that we've talked about already. Kermit wants to mow the lawn. Kermit doesn't want to mow the lawn. Can you imagine my dog mowing the lawn? That would be amazing if my dog mowed the lawn. Kermit wants to play fetch. There we go. I need to mow the lawn. Those are events I have no control over. The outcome that I want to get to is Kermit getting to play fetch because it makes him happy and he gets his exercise, and me getting to mow the lawn because it needs to be done. And so I choose a response that gets me there, that ball thrower, right? The events. Cohen has a baseball game. I can't pick when his baseball games are. Beckett wants to build with Legos. I can't control the fact that the kid loves Legos. I have an outcome that I want. I love that my son is in organized sports and grows from it and has a passion for it. I also love my other son loves to build. Those are wonderful things. So my outcome is for both of those things to happen. So I need a response that gets me there. And that response is that Lego bin, right? And this happens in educational technology too, with E plus R equals O. We think about the events we have, the outcomes we're trying to get to, and what response gets us there. Now, I've talked about 2 of my kids, so it wouldn't be right if I didn't talk about the 3rd kid. Actually, I've talked about 3 of my kids, my fur kid and 2 of my kids. I'm missing my 4th kid here, and it's the middle kiddo. So, of course, the middle kiddo has to go last. Oh, middle kid syndrome. The middle kiddo is my daughter, Parker. Parker's wonderful, and one of Parker's favorite things to do is to skip and listen to music. Now, this is a definite but situation for me. Parker likes to skip and listen to music, but we don't always want to hear her music. Listen, there's only so much Taylor Swift and Descendants soundtrack and Zombies soundtrack and Miley Cyrus that I can handle. I'm okay with her listening to that music, but I don't necessarily want to hear it. So we have a problem here. She wants to skip and listen to music, but I don't want to hear it. And that word but makes it sound like, sorry, Parker, you can't listen to the music while you skip. But that's not fair, right? I want her to be able to do that. This is an event that I don't have control over. I don't like her music. She wants to skip. I don't want to hear it. These are the events. I have an outcome where I want her to get to do that, and I want to get to not hear it. So I need to choose a response that gets me there. So I replace the word but with the word and. Parker likes to skip and listen to music, and we don't always want to hear her music. So obvious solution, right? Headphones. Let's jump back into our classroom situations now, right? We need to deliver feedback to our students. And I like to call it feed forward, by the way, which I think I first heard from Jennifer Gonzalez on her podcast, The Cult of Pedagogy, and she had on a guy named Joe Hirsch. And Hirsch is the author of a book called The Feedback Fix, and he talked about something that he learned from a guy named Marshall Goldsmith. I think I have that 3 degrees of feed forward correct. And he talked about a term called feed forward. And there's a lot of different parts of what feed forward is, but my favorite part in education is I like to say feed forward instead of feedback, because it's like feedback that changes what is done moving forward, right? And there's a little more to the term feed forward than that, but I like my feedback to actually affect a student's work moving forward. I don't want it to just be me telling them where they're wrong. I want it to be me helping them prioritize what next steps to take. So I like feed forward. So anyhow, we need feed forward opportunities. And if we're in remote learning, that's difficult because we can't have one-on-one conferences with students. So we think I need to provide feed forward opportunities, but I'm in a remote learning situation. I need to provide feed forward opportunities and I'm in a remote learning situation. That opens my brain up to consider what R will get me from that E to my intended O, right? So what R's could I choose? Well, I could choose things like recording my feedback using Screencastify or Loom or Screencast-O-Matic or whatever screencasting tool you prefer, and then my students can see my feedback in video form, right? Or I could use a tool like Seesaw that allows me to tap into a lot of different feedback tools like video and audio and text and rubric and grade and all that different stuff. So I can give my students really quality feedback that impacts them moving forward, and it can be feed forward. Kami. Kami is a PDF annotation tool, but it's on steroids because it's also a fantastic classroom instructional tool and work tool and feedback tool, because teachers can give feedback to their students using audio comments or video comments or screen recorded comments or text, a whole bunch of different ways to give really efficient and quality feedback to students that they can incorporate into what they do moving forward, and then I would call it feed forward. Flipgrid also is fantastic for that, and new updates of Flipgrid, you can now give private video feedback back to the students. So you can give them video feedback, you can give them text feedback, and you can give them rubric feedback. So all of that feedback, if done effectively, can be done in a remote learning situation, and it can impact the students moving forward. A lot of educators love to use audio comments if they're commenting on something like a Google Doc, and a lot of educators are super excited about the Chrome extension Mote right now, which allows us to give audio feedback to students and make audio comments inside of their docs. One last little but and story for me. I used to have a 200 CD booklet, 200 CD, booklet that held 200 CDs that rode around in the back seat of my old Chevy Cavalier. And it was the Chevy Cavalier for a while until I got into an accident, and then it was a Grand Prix or Grand Am, I don't remember, and then I got in an accident with that one, and then, I don't know, I probably shouldn't go through my driving record with all of you guys right now, but it rode around in the backseat of the car, and when I'd pull up to a red light and decide I wanted to switch from that Dave Matthews Band CD I was listening to to the new Tupac CD, I would have to stop at the red light and quickly reach into the back seat and flap through that 200 CD booklet and find that Tupac CD. And almost always I would not get the CD switched in time to drive away from the red light because it had turned green, and I'd have to finish that CD change at the next light, which drove me crazy. And then when I got to my destination, if I wanted to listen to music inside, I had to carry that big booklet of CDs in with me, and this was problematic, right? So this was a but situation for me back in 2002 or whatever year this was. My but situation was, I like to listen to music, but I have too many CDs or I have too many albums, right? And that made it sound like, sorry, Jake, you can't listen to all of your music. You have too many CDs. The word but shuts down the conversation. The word and opens up both parts of the dialogue, both parts of the sentence to be considered by my brain. I like to listen to music and I have too many CDs. So I got a tool that solved that problem, right? I got an iPod, my very first iPod, and I could carry around all of that music with me wherever I went. E plus R equals O. I had events that I couldn't really control. I had an outcome that I wanted to get to. All my music with me all the time, easily accessible. The R that got me there was an iPod. Thankfully, I didn't choose a Zune. Remember Zune? Yeah, those things, that didn't last long. But the crazy thing about that one, or my favorite point about that one, is that iPod actually opened up new possibilities for me too, right? Because not only could I carry my music anywhere, but I could also take my music on a run with me, which I couldn't do before. My CD player would be skipping like crazy, and I can only take one CD with me anyhow. Also, I could shuffle my songs. That was never a possibility for me before, to shuffle all 200 of my albums and just be completely surprised by what would come up next. And so the iPod actually opened up new possibilities for me. And so educational technology does that for us sometimes too, right? So think about this one. I need to increase accessibility, but I'm in a remote learning situation. Or, but I have 12 kids in my class all spread out by 6 feet. Or, but we're in a hybrid situation and some of my kids are at home and some of my kids are at school. Put the word and in there. I need to increase accessibility and I'm in a remote learning or a hybrid setting or whatever it might be. And we start to think about, how can we make our content more accessible? How can we open up new possibilities using educational technology the same way that iPod opened up new possibilities for me, right? How can we pull that off? Well, there's a lot of tools that could do this. And by the way, we talked about a whole array of them in an episode back in, I don't know if it was March or April, but it was during the initial wave of school closings. I think it was probably April by the time we talked about it. But I could use tools like Microsoft's Immersive Reader or the Chrome extension version of that Immersive Reader, or Text Helps Read and Write that allows text to speech and speech to text and has a dictionary built in and a lot of different things like that, similar to what the Immersive Reader does. I can make sure that my videos have closed captioning built into them, or open captioning, which means you can turn it on or off. I can add audio to my Google Slides to read things aloud, right? When I'm presenting my Google Slides live or in a Google Meet or Zoom, I can turn on the captioning so that it's captioned right then and there. I can teach my students how to use the accessibility features in their Chromebook, so they have all of those different accessibility features that are built into that. And by the way, that was another spring episode. But all of these situations are situations where I'm taking the word but out of the discussion and I'm opening up the dialogue by using the word and. Again, as Bernard Roth said, when you open up the dialogue with and, your brain gets to consider how it can deal with both parts of the sentence. And my favorite way to deal with both parts of the sentence is E plus R equals O. Take the event that you have no control over, and goodness knows we've got a lot of them going on for us as educators right now. Think about the outcome that you want to get to, right? A realistic one, please. And then select the response that you could choose, the thing that you can control that has the best chance of getting you to that outcome. So what response can you turn to get you to that outcome? Okay. So by the way, I have an event. Lots of educators are listening right now and want to learn about educational technology. And I have an outcome. I want educators to learn really awesome things. So I need to choose a response that will get me there. What response could I use? I could talk to Holly Clark, right? I could do an interview with Holly Clark. And that's an and situation, right? Is it an and situation? Jake Miller and Holly Clark. Not Jake Miller but Holly Clark. I don't know. Jake Miller and Holly Clark. An interview. E plus R equals O. Holly is the perfect response to supporting you with your educational technology needs for this coming school year. So let's welcome in Holly.
Today's guest.
All All right, today my guest is Holly Clark. This is my second time trying to record this introduction for Holly because the first time I didn't record, and so Holly is over on the other end laughing at me like, what an idiot. But Holly does not actually think I'm an idiot. Holly is an education thought leader, international speaker, best-selling author, and an advocate for students. She is the co-author of the Google Infused Classroom and Microsoft Infused Classroom, and the author of the brand spanking new, super exciting, everybody's pumped about it, Chromebook Infused Classroom. Holly lives in San Diego, California. You could find her on Twitter and Instagram and even this thing called TikTok that I've been hearing so much about at Holly Clark EDU. You could also find her on Facebook in the group Infused Classroom on Facebook. But not like that stuff will all be in the show notes for you to access. But here in the podcast, not in the show notes, is actually the Holly Clark. Welcome in, Holly.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited. And what a mouthful with all those Infused Classroom books. I'm sorry. I need to probably change it up.
Right. There is a lot of Infused going on in there, Holly. I feel like you're running a juice bar.
And I'm not, because I have no time for anything other than remote learning for teachers and blog posts, but I wish I were.
Well, you are infusing a lot of support for all the educators out there. It's been a tough 5 or 6 months for educators, and there's been a group of people like you especially who are just out there like pounding the virtual pavement in webinars and things like that, just offering support wherever you can. As I said, infusing your support in there. So that's awesome you're doing that stuff.
And I've been infusing it with Matt Miller a lot lately, and that's been really fun for me. He's a great person to partner up and help teachers with.
Right. Yeah. So much positivity and so much knowledge coming from Matt. When somebody asks me like, what website should I go check out? And I'm like, you just got to check out Matt's website. And, certainly there are other ones I list in there, but his mindset about education. And so it's been great hearing the two of you work together with both of your, positivity for education and support for educators and kind of the melding of those ideas. We talk on the podcast about the adjacent possible, which is when like what's possible for you is expanded by what's adjacent to you. So kind of putting your two ideas together has been really exciting.
Do you know that used to be in my first keynote, the adjacent possible? I did a whole keynote about it.
Nice. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I first heard of it through George Coros's book, and then kind of delved back into the work of Stephen Johnson and Stuart Kaufman to hear about it, and it like so many different ideas come from that idea of adjacent possible. Mm-hmm. Yep, and it's like it infuses into all of our ideas. Holly, do you feel like it infuses things?
You can infuse anything.
You can infuse
but it's
anything.
More important to infuse purposeful technology into your curriculum.
Wow, look at Holly kicking it up a notch for the season 3 premiere of Educational Duct Tape, and Holly's getting. I'm trying to joke about juice bars and using the word infusing, and Holly's getting all fancy. Impressive stuff. Nice. Well, congrats on the new book, Holly.
Thank you so much, and it's been a whirlwind because it was going to come out before everything happened in our world. And I kind of took it back and I put in some things that I thought would be really purposeful for teachers. And one of the things with this book, by the way, that is unique is that I was reading all these books and I'm an avid book reader. I probably read an education book a week.
Wow.
And none of them were talking about the student. They were all about the teacher and what the teacher could do. And the teacher could do this. And even my first book, the Google Infused Classroom, is really about what the teacher can do to infuse technology with those things they have to do, like formative assessments and differentiation. And so with this one, I really wanted to talk about stop asking what we can do with the technology and ask what the students can do with the technology. So that's the Chromebook Infused Classroom, just is about student-centered learning in a digital world.
Nice. And that's so important, so powerful, like right now for educators who are in a situation of remote learning, but also even we're in the face-to-face classroom, because what truly changes the way we could do things with our students is what our students can do, right? It's wonderful that we could get really rich formative assessment data from running a quizzes, or not, I guess that's not rich formative assessment data, but really good formative assessment data from running something like quizzes. But the real rich stuff, the real high quality stuff, and the stuff that really can change the way we do things in our classrooms is what we can have our students do with technology, right?
Right. And what we can allow them to become as learners if we do it correctly. And that's even an ISTE standard. If you go to ISTE student standards and you look at them, the first one is an empowered student. And the first one of that is them understanding who they are as learners. And I talk a lot about that because we don't do that. And then we say, well, students aren't organized and they're not all these things. It's because we're not helping lift them up to be these things. And that's really what I wanted to be able to do.
Right. I mean, it's such a huge skill for them to have in their futures. And you're right. Those ISTE standards really are student focused standards. It's like they're standards of what the teacher should empower the student to do. Like throughout all those standards, it's a lot of what we do for our students, not what we do ourselves. Really. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Wow, Holly. So this is our second recording of this intro because I forgot to press record the first time, and we were much goofier the first time. You got really, really serious and heavy with empowering students there. Nice. I like it. But even though Holly is getting us all serious about empowering students and ISTE standards, we're going to have a little bit of fun. Are you up for a little bit of fun, Holly?
I am so ready.
She's ready. Nice.
2 truths and 1 lie.
So we're going to start off with a game of 2 truths and 1 lie. So for the seasoned listeners of the podcasts know that Holly is going to say 3 statements. 1's going to be a lie. 2 are going to be true. I am going to incorrectly guess which one's the lie. I'm going to be trying to guess correctly, but I'm going to mess it up. And then I'm going to also incorrectly ask you what one's the lie because I just can't handle playing this game. I always screw this game up. It's above my IQ level. I'm not sure. But we're going to try it out. And the listeners have fun laughing at me as I try to get through this anyhow. So let's see how we could do, Holly. So what are your 3 statements?
So my first statement is my favorite country is France.
Okay.
My second statement is I only missed 1 on the math SAT portion.
Wow.
And I have not been to Thailand. One of those is a lie.
Oh, goodness. Okay, so I already know from following Holly on Instagram for a couple years that Holly is a seasoned traveler, right? And loves to travel, right? So I find the Thailand piece to be kind of hard to believe. And a former guest on the podcast, Sethi de Klerk, would be disappointed to hear if you have not been to Thailand. He would invite you to come there and try fried scorpion or scorpion on a stick. That's what he told me when he was on the podcast.
In South Korea.
Okay. No, okay. Yeah, I would not.
I don't even know if I had it. I looked at it and went, yeah, I'm okay.
I'm guessing that you could pretty much taste it by looking at it,
yeah.
Right? Like you know what it's going to taste like. Bad. Tree bark. Okay, so the France thing I find believable. I don't want to doubt your math skills, but -1 on the SAT is pretty stinking impressive. So I think the Thailand's the lie. I think you've been to Thailand.
So I've not been to Thailand.
Ooh, we'll call Sethi up and he'll make some recommendations on where you should travel to in Thailand.
And it's been sad for me, and that's why I chose it. I want to go to Thailand.
You need to cross that off your bucket list then. Okay, so that's true. So then now look at me and understand how to play this game. So now I've got to figure out which one's the lie. I think the math one is the lie. I think you are a phenomenal math student, but not quite just -1 on the math SAT.
So that is also a truth.
What?
I am so good at this game.
You are nailing it. Okay.
France
wow.
It's not my favorite country. I did live there for 2 years, but it's not my favorite. My favorite is probably Australia, or South Africa.
The sad part of this is during our failed attempt at recording this one, I didn't press record. Holly actually talked about the first place she hopes to go to after traveling kind of opens back up and it's safe to travel was going to be Australia. So how I didn't guess that right up front, I don't know. This is my first time recording one of these 2 truths and 1 lie in like 3 months. So maybe I'm just out of shape on this. I just can't do it right.
Well, I am, and no disrespect, but I'm this blonde girl who lives in Southern California and used to surf, and probably on my thing is not that I was really good at math. And plus, I don't do math now because my teachers didn't inspire me. I was really good at it, but they didn't inspire me. But I will say this. My thing that we talked about before was that I want to go to Hobart. And I want to tell you something interesting about Hobart. Hobart, Tasmania, which is the little island to the south of the big main island. Did you know in Hobart they have southern lights just like northern lights?
I did not.
Most people don't. It's pretty interesting.
Are they upside down?
Yes, they come actually the opposite way now.
They come out of the ground.
And they're pink. No.
Nice. That's cool. So you're hoping to go there and see the Southern Lights, and I assume you've been and seen them before?
I have not seen the Southern Lights, but I've been to Hobart, and I just can't stop thinking about Hobart. And I think in the next 10 years, Hobart will become like the foodie destination, the destination, like they have amazing wine there that you can't get it, in any place in the US. So when you're putting together your list of places to visit, do not leave off Hobart, Tasmania.
Well, when I'm putting together my list of places to visit, I'm just going to email Holly, and Holly's going to send me an itinerary of destinations to go to. Does that sound okay?
That aren't Thailand.
That aren't Thailand. That aren't Thailand. Because not because she doesn't want to go to Thailand. She just hasn't been there. She can't make any recommendations. So I will call Sethi about Thailand, and I will call Holly about literally everywhere else and get my recommendations. Except Sethi will try to get me to eat scorpion on a stick, and I will not. I will refuse.
Would you, though, just to be able to go?
Would I like? Oh, this is like a which of the following was less torturous. So you want to know? Would I eat scorpion on a stick in order to go to Thailand? Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if that's how I've got to get into Thailand. Like do I get paid? Like do I get to go for free just by eating the scorpion on a stick? Mm-hmm. This is Fear Factor. Yeah, I'll do it.
Actually, you get to go for free if you eat all of the bugs that are on the street carts.
All of them?
There's going to be a lot, man.
Okay, I'm out. The scorpion on a stick, it's fried. I was going to do it. The street cart bugs, no thanks.
I mean, I don't even know. I haven't been to Thailand as we've.
I do want to go, but I'm not eating the bugs. Nice. So now that we have sufficiently goofed around and traveled around the world and heard about Holly's SAT scores and things like that, we are going to do a little bit of educational duct tape now. So for any new listeners to the show, educational duct tape is my slightly silly dad humor metaphor of an ed tech integration mindset, which says that educational technology is at its best when we're using it as a tool to solve a problem or meet a goal or address a learning standard, not when it's the focus of what we're doing, but when it's a tool that we're using. And it's been hard, by the way, Holly, over these last 5 months with everybody focusing on, I've got to learn how to use Zoom. I've got to learn how to use Flipgrid. I've got to learn how to use, and yes, you do, right? You probably do. But the reason that you've got to learn them is not because you need them. It's because of the things that your kids need, right? So we need to think of them as tools that we need to support our students, to support our learners, to do the kinds of things that we know are important in our classroom. So,
but what you're describing is workflow. And
right.
It's the workflow of getting your kids to some place where that they can work with you. But what we want to talk about is the integration piece. And people always do this to me when I come to their school district and I'll say, so how are your teachers? And they're like, oh, they're good. They're on Google Classroom. And
right.
I'm like,
well, great.
That's workflow. That's not integration.
Right.
So that's what I think we're going to talk about today is what does that integration piece look like?
Right. How do we integrate these tools in a way that can possibly impact the student learning experience? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I've got a question for you, Holly, which I am confident you're going to have some awesome answers for our listeners on. And the question is, how can I, as an educator, how can I leverage blended learning to rethink assessment to yield richer information about student learning and growth? So how can we rethink assessment in the digital age such that it yields richer information about our students' learning and growth?
And so it happens to be, this is my most passionate thing and what is all inside of the Chromebook Infused Classroom. But I feel really strongly about the fact that we're not looking at assessment the way we need to look at it. And it's because when I was a student, assessment came in the form of my teacher asked me multiple choice questions, or I did project-based learning, and that's if she was super progressive. Mm-hmm. But now that we have the tools that we have and it's 2020, we need to really think about assessment as getting into the minds of our students. And what I mean by this is using things like Flipgrid or Seesaw or Screencastify so that when a student turns in, let's just say a paper, and they've got let's say a 5-paragraph essay, I ask them to record their thinking to layer on top of that. So it's kind of multidimensional for me. So they might take their paper and put it on a screen on Flipgrid and say, here's my paper. I'm super proud of paragraph 2. In paragraph 2, my word choices, I spent the most time on it. And in this paper, I tried to get across the point of blah, blah, blah. And for feedback, I'm really still struggling with conclusions. So if you could give me feedback on conclusions. Before, and I'll call it 1985 teaching, I would get a paper, and I taught English, despite my math skills. Haha, just kidding. But so I taught English, and I would get a paper, and I would just grade it based on what I wanted from that paper, not from what the student needed, wanted, accomplished. And so now I can put that onus kind of on the student to explain to me their learning journey. And then each of my students becomes an individual to me instead of a same content, same time, same way. And so we can do this with math. We can do this with anything. But if we're not, and I use this term called press record. And I want teachers, as we move forward into, I call this digital pedagogies, as we move forward into these digital pedagogies, to think, did I press record? Did I hear from every student? Did I get at their thinking, their learning journey? And we don't do that because we didn't have that happen to us as kids. So we're not thinking in that way. And we need to redefine data to not have to be points on a number points in a spreadsheet. That data is really listening to a student's journey.
Right. Well, and if you think about when you look at those data points on a spreadsheet, right, you've got to think about what questions are you hearing in your mind, and your questions that you're probably hearing in your mind are, gosh, I wish I knew how, like, why this kid got this wrong, right? I wish I knew where the gaps in their understanding were, or I wish I could really tell if this score that I see for this kid is actually growth and something that they maybe are proud of, or if maybe this is something I should be concerned about, right? And there's so many wish I knews when we look at those things. And what you're saying is, if we use this kind of press record mindset, then we'll know those things too, right? Not just the simple data stuff. We'll have a grasp and understanding of the student's learning.
So yes, and one thing I started to do maybe a few years ago is really come back to this idea of assessment of prior knowledge. So when Flipgrid came out, I started to have kids record to me, like, what do I know, let's say, about plant and animal cells? And so they would go into Flipgrid and tell me everything they know. And I just had a kid do this prior to COVID, and the kid's like, there's photosynthesis cells, and like, so I know obviously we have some work to do there. And I take that assessment of prior knowledge and I grab that so I know where that child is. Not every kid, but that one kid. And then we grab, in using Book Creator, we grab these artifacts of learning along the way until we reach the end when they turn in their final product. And I look at that kind of Book Creator, and I look at where they started, the things they created along the way, and where they ended. And so I grade, let's just say, Johnny on his growth trajectory. And I do Alicia on her growth trajectory, and I'm not treating them all as the same kid. And when we talk about individualized instruction, often I hear people be like voice and choice, which is great. But voice and choice is not individualized instruction. It's individualized outputs.
Right. It's individualized expression, not instruction. Right.
Yeah. And if we're going to truly individualize, we've got to look at a kid as their own learner, and we've got to hear from them all along the way. And before, it was really hard. I couldn't do it when I first started teaching. I can do that so quickly and easily now.
Right.
And one other thing about this whole talking about your learning. So I often get in a fight with my co-author of the Google Infused Classroom, and she says, I have 100 students. I can't listen to them all the time.
Right.
And my argument to her is it's not about you. It's about the student. They need to articulate their learning so they become better speakers, better at word choice. And basically what we're doing with students in schools is we're getting them ready to get a job.
Right.
And they're going to sit across the desk from someone and answer questions, and they're going to have to articulate that. And they're going to be an entrepreneur and have to get funding from a VC. So these kids need to be able to explain themselves. And in school, we spend most of our time in text-based responses. No one's going to be like, okay, what, you would like a job today. I have a question for you. Now answer it on paper and hand that paper to me across the desk.
Right.
That's never going to happen.
Right. Yeah, it's ironic that you bring that up, because one of the reasons I started this podcast years ago when I started it is because I found that even though I could express my opinions about educational technology or education or things like that in writing and in emails and things like that, if I was face to face with somebody and talking to them about it, I struggled in that situation. And I think part of that reasoning is what you're saying there, where I was not trained throughout my educational years to do that. Right. So I said, I'm going to do this on a podcast, and now I've got to talk to Holly live. So when Holly says this to me, I've got to be thinking about what she's saying and ready to converse with her on it. And you're saying let's give kids that opportunity to develop that ability, to develop that skill, right?
And there's two things that happen there. We know this from cognitive science. You can't be a good reader and you can't be a good writer until you're good orally. But we shut down the oral in classrooms, and then we're like, we don't have good writing scores or reading scores. Let me come to your school and fix that for you on Flipgrid.
Right.
You would never think that. But as soon as we allow students to talk, your reading and writing scores are going to go up, and in some instances skyrocket. So you have all these people who are keeping kids in from recess. They're making them do a bunch of worksheets to get their reading scores up. And it's really letting them talk more. And I know in 4th grade, my teacher called me motor mouth, which is okay. I was, but guess what I do for a living?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Thanks for shutting me up, because I too have to really work at my speaking ability.
Yeah. Yeah. You needed that chance. Was that 5th grade? You said you were motor mouth?
4th grade.
4th grade. My 5th grade teacher called me megaphone mouth.
Oh, no way. Really? People would be fired for that now.
Right. You were motor mouth and I was megaphone mouth.
And look at what you do.
What did I do? I got quieter. Yeah.
No, but you have a podcast.
Right.
That's a megaphone. Hello. Thank you. Thank you for.
Right. There's that connection. So you're putting Tanya on blast here a little bit about the Google Infused classroom here with her thoughts on those Flipgrid recordings. So what would we got to get Tanya on the show someday now to stick up for herself? But what would she?
No, I convinced her.
You convinced her? Oh, she's on board with you now?
Yeah.
Nice. So what I was going to say is, I don't think it's necessarily, and this is one thing I try to talk about on the show a lot, is that some educators might be like, for whatever reason, listening to kids' voices on Flipgrid isn't the best way for me to hear and assess them. And I think that's okay if they come up with another way that they're able to get those rich assessments. You can't go like, well, hearing them on Flipgrid doesn't work for me, so I'm going to do a multiple choice test. Well, that's not fair, right? You could say, this doesn't work for me, so I'm going to do it this way. How do you feel about that kind of mindset?
We don't have time on the show and we would need to sit down at a happy hour to get the real truth out of me. But here's what's up with this. I understand the angst of having to listen to them all. And right. Maybe they don't want to hear. That's a lot of work. So there's a couple. Right. Flipgrid, it plays Netflix style. So when I'm cooking, I just put it on. I'm teaching 50 international teachers right now, and they just did a Flipgrid. And I will admit, I was like, oh man, 50. But then as I listened to them, I was like, oh, that's cool. And I was taking notes on stuff. But I put it on while I was infusing juice.
You're cooking. You were infusing lots of things right there. You were infusing Flipgrid and learning and international students, and you're cooking too, all at the same time. That's impressive, Holly.
But I played it Netflix style so that I didn't have to listen to them. I mean, like, I didn't have to sit down and listen to them. But I will say this also. There are times when I don't have to listen to every response. It's the act of, so these teachers were reflecting on what we did that day. It's the act of them reflecting that's important. Then maybe I can have other students watch each other so that they get the views. I can turn the views off now in the new upgrade, I think. I'm pretty sure. And could be wrong.
Yeah, you can. I'm pretty sure you can too.
Okay. So that no one knows if I watched it or I didn't. It's the act of explaining your thinking. And if you can tell me what you've learned it. Right. If you can regurgitate what you learn, that's the part where you said, how would I what would I think and what would I say? That's the part where I'm going to go at you with pedagogy, because I don't believe that's true.
Right. So it's important to you, whether Flipgrid's the tool or not, it's important to you that you are hearing them reflect on and express what they actually learned. And that voice is important.
And if I need to also layer on there multiple choice, that's fine. But to just do multiple choice or worksheets is almost, and I'm sorry to use this word, but it could be malpractice in 2020.
Yeah. It's like, to make like a metaphor for it or a parallel to it, it's like it's like a doctor having access to medications and tools that they know can benefit their students and choosing not to use them for whatever reason. And you're right. It's close to a malpractice to have access to these tools and not use them. It's understandable if we're like integrating them one at a time and learning how to do it, but it's a malpractice if we're not even trying to do it, if we're not moving forward on doing it.
And one thing I want to add is people learn Zoom and they learn Teams and they learn Google Classroom. Now it's time to look out, and I'm you can't see this in the podcast, but I'm doing like the explore, look out on the mountaintop, look out and see what's next. And if I were going to give anyone a recommendation, what's next is Flipgrid. Period.
Right.
And that's because that's where I can hear from my students. And it's easy to put into Google Classroom, and it's easy to put into Teams. And so that would be my recommendation. And I want to say one other thing. So I was working with this teacher in Canada, and she did this amazing lesson. And I sat down as a student and took part in the lesson, and I worked with the group, and we deconstructed her lesson afterwards. And she was like, yeah, I loved the way it went. And I said, well, what did the students learn? And she's like, well, you could blah, 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 blah. And she told me what they learned. And I said, how do you know that? Oh, because I saw the looks on their faces. So let's break that down. Do you really know that? And I said, did you hear from every kid? Because you could have, with Flipgrid, in 2 minutes, heard from every kid and got to find out what they learned in that lesson. Because what you saw was a group work project where they filled some stuff out on a chart, and maybe one kid in that group got it. I sat with a group who one kid got it, and the rest were like, I don't really care. And so asking her to rethink, actually, that's a little strong. They were awesome. But asking her, how do you know? You could hear from every student in the class before you had left today in 2 minutes with Flipgrid is something to consider.
Yeah. And I think that touches on that kind of malpractice you were talking about there, where seeing their faces and being able to interpret if they understand that is a powerful part of, is a powerful formative assessment tool that we have at our fingertips. But if that's the only formative assessment tool that we're using, that's problematic, right? If she had said to you, I'm pretty sure they understand because I could see it on their faces, but to be confident that I understand, I'm going to take this next step and use Flipgrid. Like it's one thing to use that as one step in her evaluation of student understanding and student learning, but she needs to take the full steps to get that real good, rich understanding that you're talking about there. And
I like that you said that, Jake, because those light bulb moments that we see in kids' faces are a data point. So that is true.
Right. It's all data points, but some data points are better than others. And a data point where you could see a student's face on screen and hear their voice and hear them talking about it and hear them reflecting on it, that's a much stronger data point. That doesn't mean we need to throw the other ones out. That means we need to focus on getting those ones in, right?
And I just want to say one more thing. I'm sorry. I know you have you don't have a 7-hour podcast.
Maybe today we will. Holly, keep going.
But one thing about when I start working with teachers and I have them use Flipgrid is that students' responses are not good at first. And it takes scaffolding on the teacher's part to say, you know what, think about these details when you respond. And you have to work with students for probably about 3 weeks to get them at this place where they're leaving these articulate, well thought out responses that show the cognitive struggle that they go through to do it. And so I just want to say that because I have a lot of teachers give up and they're like, those kids, they're not good at this. That's our job. That's where we become the facilitator. And our job has shifted in these new digital pedagogies. So we have to do that part.
Yeah, absolutely. Today's super secret code is Hobart. It is the city in Tasmania that Holly is excited to visit. Hobart. 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 So if you'd like a certificate of listening, laughing, and learning for today's episode, head to eduducttape.com/Hobart. hobart.com/certificate. Select this episode and type in the code Hobart, HOBART. Absolutely. I want to direct back to a couple things you said back in your very initial kind of example of what you were talking about doing with students, and you were kind of saying there were 3 points that stuck out to me when you were talking about using a tool like Flipgrid for that richer assessments. And one is that you were talking about students reflecting, like they were saying things like, "I'm really proud of my word choice in this paragraph," was something that you said in there. So not only are we seeing the kids' word choice, but we're knowing that they're proud of it, that we're knowing that this was a growth for them there, even though it might not be as good as the word choice of the kid next to them. Like this was a step forward for them. So that reflecting was one piece you were saying there. And then you were also giving an example of them advocating for specific feedback. Like they were saying, like you said, "I really want to hear your input on whatever." I forget what it was. But if we know where the kid is looking to grow, then we know there's some autonomy there too, right? We know they're going to be more motivated if we're hearing them say, "This is what I'm excited about." And then the other part there, which we've kind of touched on multiple times, is being able to explain their thinking there and be able to not just see if they're right or wrong, but understand why they're right or wrong and how much they understand it. And I was jotting down this quote as fast as I could, but you said something like, when I do this, each of my students becomes an individual, right? Mm-hmm. They're not just a bunch of data points. They're not just a list of scores. They literally are individuals, because now you know where each kid is on this spectrum of learning there. And that's powerful stuff.
If we go back to ISTE, they become empowered learners. Mm-hmm. Can you imagine that we used to ask kids to turn in a paper and not give us this kind of feedback?
Right.
It's amazing to me. And I did it. I taught in 1996. That was my first year. I didn't get rich information in which to help them with. And when I thought of paragraph 2, they loved it. They thought it was their best word choice. Might have been where I was like, "Oh my goodness, what is this?"
Right, but you couldn't realize in that setting that it really was something that they were proud of, and it did represent a growth for them, even though for you it wasn't where you want to see them. Now you could know that it actually is a forward movement for them, right?
And I have to be honest, not the other day because it's COVID, but 8 months ago, I had dinner with 2 of my students from my 1997 class. And I'm literally sitting there with them. And I said, "I just want to apologize to you. I wasn't the teacher that I am now. And I feel like maybe, and they, of course, because they're having dinner with me 25 years later, thought I was the best teacher ever. But I feel like I let them down because I didn't have access to these tools that I could have really helped them."
Right.
But it's like,
and I quote Dr. Maya Angelou regularly on the show: "Do the best you can until you know better, and then when you know better, do better." So in 1997, Holly was doing the best she could, and now she knows better, and Holly wouldn't do it that way again. And you have new tools available to you to make that happen. And thanks to reflecting on those years and seeing what you'd like to improve on that. And that's what we try to talk about on the show, right? Is you identified a problem in the way that you used to do things, and now you know better, and now you're going to do better with it.
And Jake, it's as easy as, and I'm going to make t-shirts when there is another conference that we can all be in. You're going to see me with a t-shirt that says press record. It's that easy. Press record. And it's a cute little name I gave to it. But walk away from the class and say to yourself, did I press record today? Did kids press record today? And also, you should be pressing record and explaining your directions more thoroughly. And there's a lot we could talk about. But right now, we're focusing on that assessment and just press record.
Right. So you mentioned pressing record with Flipgrid, and we both, I agree with you, love Flipgrid because you can watch them Netflix style. They autoplay right through them. You could speed them up and watch them in double speed. You could be kind of reflecting and taking notes on the side while the things are playing. You can give feedback right there in Flipgrid, whether it's text feedback or video feedback or rubric feedback. And now they've added in that your video feedback can also be private feedback, because it used to be either private text feedback or public video feedback, but now it could be private video feedback too. So lots of great stuff in there.
Of their best stuff so that they can look at that later when they're not, like, I've had kids who are like, I'm not reading as well as I thought, Miss Clark. And I'm like, hold the phone. Let me show you your reading in September. And they're like, oh, I'm doing good.
Yeah, well, that's a great point too, because when I originally asked the question, I said richer information about student learning and growth. So by doing something like a mixtape like that, you're able to then also model and show that growth.
And I can stay in my 1980 comfort zone. No, I'm kidding.
Because we had called it a mixtape, right? I used to make some pretty awesome mixtapes. But I would be sitting waiting for the local radio station to play this. I would call it in, request a song, and then you sit there ready to hit record when it plays it on the radio, right?
Yep.
I'm acting it out on screen. Holly could see me in video. You guys can't see me listening, but I've got my fingers on the record button ready to go.
Pressing record.
I was literally. So before we wrap this up, Holly, I'm going to take up like 2 more minutes of your time. What other tools, I'm going to put you on the spot. What other tools would you use for press record other than Flipgrid? I think Flipgrid is a fantastic answer here. But are there other great press record tools that you like?
Well, I love Screencastify. I've been a Screencastify fan since the minute they came out. Still am. Die for them. I love Seesaw. And now that in Wakelet, you can use the Flipgrid Shorts camera to create some of your best work if you need to, and then leave me a video about why you're proud about this, then Wakelet becomes that one. There are many tools. You can go into OneNote and press record about what your notebook is about. Every tool almost has a press record.
Yeah. I want to loop back to one you mentioned there, which was Screencastify and Screencastify Submit, which just got out of beta. I don't think it's been launched yet officially, but it's kind of it's Flipgrid-esque in its way that a teacher can ask for videos from students. So what a great way to press record, right?
Yeah. And I'll be honest with you. People ask me all the time, when do you use Flipgrid and when do you use Seesaw and why would you use both? And same thing with Screencastify. Screencastify has these tools that if I'm in the tab mode, I can circle that second paragraph and say here, and I can underline those words I'm really proud of. You can do it in Flipgrid too. It's just not as easy. So in that instance, I might say to kids, pick the tool that's easiest for you to be able to accomplish telling me about your paper. I don't have to make them use Flipgrid.
Right. And I don't think there's anything wrong with a teacher that says, I'm going to use this one of those 6 tools you just mentioned and none of the other ones, as long as they're doing the things that you're talking about here. Like you mentioned those 3 parts of pressing record was that the students can reflect, that they can ask for specific feedback, and they can explain their thinking. If they're able to do all 3 of those things, I don't really care what tool you use, right? But
if you're a teacher and you're only comfortable with Flipgrid, it's okay. You don't have to be voice and choice, because right now you're already doing better teaching than most by pressing record. Yeah. And I want to say one thing to the people who are listening to this. I feel so passionately about Flipgrid, and I would go to schools and I would do an hour on Flipgrid and leave, that I made a free course for both Flipgrid and Book Creator because I find them so important in our new assessment pieces. And people can go to that by going to infused.link/online. And those are free. And I want them to always be free because I want you to use these 2 tools. And Book Creator is the most underused tool in a Chromebook classroom. And it should be like number 1 after 2.
Let's just say top 5 and not order them and offend anybody. But I totally agree because Book Creator has the ability to press record, but it has the ability to do other things too, right? Like text-based and video-based and picture-based and bringing in different interactive things. And you're right, it's a phenomenal tool. So you said there's one at that link for Book Creator and another about Flipgrid as well.
And Adobe Spark, if you're interested in Adobe Spark, which I also love.
Yeah, which also could be a good press record platform too if you're using the video. They're like you said, almost all of the big tech tools are adding in those abilities now. Wow. Okay. So I've got in the show notes for the listeners, I've got that link in there. I've got that list of tools in there. Everybody's going to go check them out. Everybody's going to follow Holly at Holly Clark EDU. Everybody's going to message her for travel recommendations, except for to Thailand.
Well, if you have Hobart, if you want to go to Hobart, Tasmania, you talk to me. It's the best.
Talk to Holly. And if you have math questions, if you have a problem you're stuck on, send it to Holly to help you with that.
And it's 16-year-old Holly.
We'll travel back in time and ask her. And if you have anything that needs infusing, Holly will help you with that too, right?
Yeah. And if it's a Moscow Mule, I can infuse some blueberry.
I thought you were going to infuse a Chromebook into the Moscow Mule. I don't know, Holly. All right, Holly. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thanks for having me. And thanks everyone for listening.
Oh, such an honor and a blast having Holly on the show. As I told you coming into the show at the beginning, she just has so much insight to share. She is such an amazing educator. I am so glad that she was willing to take time out of her busy, super busy schedule to talk to me and my goofy self and be on this goofy podcast. And I appreciate you guys for being here, listening still more than an hour in. You guys are so awesome. But now comes my favorite part of the show. This is the celebration of the adjacent possible. This is the time where we get to hear from the duct tapers, the things that the duct tapers have shared in recent times. So first up, an Apple Podcasts review, and this comes from my buddy Brianna Shaner. So Bri, thank you so much for this feedback. But the feedback she left a couple of days ago, it was 5 stars, and it says such great insight. I love listening to what Jake and his guests have to share in terms of educational technology. There are so many different options out there. Jake makes it so easy to make an informed choice of what ed tech is best for our students. Highly recommend. Thank you so much, Bri. I hope, by the way, that you guys don't mind me reading one of these reviews on the show every episode. I'm not trying to brag by sharing them. I'm just so grateful to the people who leave them, and I'm geeking out that somebody would take time out of their day to go into Apple Podcasts and do that for me. It's just so rad. So I just feel like I have to share it. I'm just so excited about sharing it, so I have to do so. Normally in this segment, I also share some of my favorite tweets from on Twitter, my favorite hashtag EDU duct tape tweets. But being that we've been in the summertime weeks and months, and we've been in the everlasting period of the COVID-19 insanity, Twitter's been a little bit slower lately, so I don't have any tweets to share. But if you want to hear your tweet in an episode 2 weeks from now, please get on Twitter and share something witty or exciting or interesting about today's episode, and I will be sure, especially if it makes me giggle, I will be sure to share it in the next episode. The very final thing we have to share is something from the hashtag EDU duct tape Flipgrid grid, so let's hop over to there. And we've got something from longtime listener in front of the show, Susan Applin. This was a little bit old. This is from last October, but it's still relevant as Susan talks about some things that she heard in a podcast episode last fall. And for those of you that want to hear your voices on the show in the near future or want to reply to Susan's actual video here, you could head over to flipgrid.com/edu duct tape. You could leave feedback, you could leave questions, or you can leave these things you want to share, kind of like Susan kind of give some feedback and a little bit of a share here. You could just share some tech stuff. You can give some feedback. You can give a question that you might want us to answer in a future episode. Anything like that is just fine. Flipgrid.com/edu duct tape. And if you'd like to respond to Susan in particular, I'll put a link to her actual video in the show notes. You can click right on it and hop in there with a response if you'd like to. Take it away, Susan.
This is Susan Applin at Applin Teacher at Twitter, and I'm a digital integration specialist at Dutch Fork High School in Irmo, South Carolina. I wanted to just give feedback on 2 items from the most recent podcast. One is about the Pear Deck and the different sort of formative assessment tools. Jake, I really appreciate that you took a little bit of time to compare those tools. I think that's something that a lot of people don't get time to do. So I appreciate that you did that. And you had asked whether your assessment of Pear Deck was fair, and I definitely think it was. It gave a really good overview of what it was. This is the first year we've had Pear Deck at the premium version for all of our teachers, and are finding that those additional tools and feedback are really useful for them. And the second area that I wanted to give feedback was on the Google Sites. We are using Google Sites in a lot of different areas at school. Again, we're Google Apps for Education District, and we're finding the same thing that you mentioned, that we don't really need to create the templates anymore. I'm at a high school level because it's so easy to make a Google site. And I always make sure that when I talk to my students and go into different classes, I talk to them about how these are skills they can use in the future, that they can make sites for the businesses they have or interests that they have or a way to share things. So right now we're using them in creative writing classes, math classes, history classes, and it's just a great tool for that.
Thank you for that, Susan. Thank you for listening to the show and for submitting that there on the Flipgrid. Again, at flipgrid.com/edu duct tape if you want to submit something there too. I appreciate Susan calling in and, confirming that those things that I had compared about Pear Deck and Nearpod last fall were accurate, although it's changed now as both tools have added in some features, and Nearpod just announced a whole bunch of new ones on August 3rd, but I really feel like you can't go wrong. They're both phenomenal tools, but I appreciate the confirmation that we had some good content in there, Susan, and the kind words about it, as well as the discussion that I had, I believe it was with Mike Muhammad is what she's referring to there, about using Google Sites for digital portfolios and whether or not we like to use templates for them or not. But I love to hear from a duct taper and their thoughts on how they use the educational technology in the classroom, or maybe what they took away from an episode. So please do hop over there and share. And again, in 2 weeks and a fortnight, when we have our next episode, I'd love to be sharing your voice, your tweet, or your podcast review, if you would be so kind as to do one of those things that helps you get your voice heard on the show. And I'd love to spotlight the duct tapers that are out there. So that does it for today's episode. A big thanks to Holly Clark for being a part of the show. A big thanks to Pear Deck for sponsoring this episode. And a big thanks to you for listening. As always, I want to thank you for what you do. Many of your colleagues are listening to some goofy podcast with Joe Rogan or something or another, and nothing serious. And you're here trying to actually learn. Maybe I'm not always serious, but you're trying to learn for your students. Your students are maybe not even listening to a podcast at all. They're watching something on Netflix or playing video games, and you are listening to a podcast to get better for your students. And I appreciate you for that. As a teacher, as a fellow educator, I am proud of you for what you're doing. And as a parent, even though you're probably not my own kids' teachers, even if you are, please let me know that you're listening to the show. Are you guys listening? But as a parent, I appreciate the things that you guys do for students. Thank you guys. Have a great day, and I will see you again in a fortnight.
Thank you for listening to the Educational Duct Tape Podcast. Please visit eduducttape.com to join the discussion, share possible topics, inquire about being a guest, or contact Jake. And remember, duct is spelled with a T, not a quack quack K.